During our time at the Fab Four, he attended our final live performance. Give this some thought. In 1967, inside London's Abbey Road studios. Air contains electrical charges. The hum of guitars is produced by the amplifiers. Cigarette smoke rises above reel-to-reel tape stacks as engineers dash from booth to booth. There's more Beatles music for the late night. Ringo sits silently behind the drum set, while Paul tweaks a bass riff. John jots down half poems on a napkin. George gets lost in stacked chords and so on. Because tonight someone is coming, someone fresh. Customers rave about them. They may be the next Beatles, according to some managers. It is their intention to swing by the set, say hi, jot down some notes, and who knows, maybe you can even wow the celebs they admired when they were little. The opening of the studio door, though, brings about a change. As the group enters, Ringo remains motionless and expressionless. All he does is narrow his eyes. Its enthusiasm, confidence, and volume were overwhelming. His entire body tenses up at the sight of that one glance. He continues to remain silent as he sets down his sticks. We will wrap up the meeting ahead of schedule. No rationale or argument was advanced. For decades, no one dared to mention that band's name again, due to the fact that Ringo Starr, known as the quiet Beatle and peace and love poster child, wasn't always so pleasant. Beneath the allure, from behind the shades, he maintains score. At 84 years old, he has finally broken that silence after decades. When Ringo lists the 6 bands he will never forgive, he is being very forthright. These groups either made fun of his talent, spoke ill of the Beatles, or were simply too sensitive for him. These disagreements are far from trivial or emotional. These are stories of giants who stepped on each other's toes, public slaps and clandestine betrayals. The most shocking thing was that for some of them, their love of the Beatles was central to who they were. To start, there was that band that strutted confidently into Abbey Road and departed with Ringo's timeless hit, Dislike. Also, assuming that this list is solely concerned with rock and roll battles is incorrect. Both members of the Rolling Stones can keep up a good tempo. As the bad guys to the Beatles' sweetness, they were the most legendary band of all time. Their friendship was strong when they were together, but it weakened when they weren't. The feud was well known, but Ringo had refrained from discussing it. There were 2 major British bands in the early 60s, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. However, behind the scenes of the press pictures, tensions were high, particularly among the rhythm groups. One time, Charlie Watts remarked to Ringo, "Anyone could have done what you did." This was in reference to Ringo's fortunate status as a member of the Beatles. It was said with a mischievous grin. It is possible that Charles found it humorous. Neither did Ringo. He was unconcerned with your playing speed and the flashiness of your fills. It was all about prioritizing the song over ego and show, feeling over show. In retrospect, Ringo claims the Stones misunderstood the difference between simplicity and laziness. It was spot on. He was under no need to display anything he had previously. According to him, the Rolling Stones were never without an exhibit. It was not us. In regards to that casual remark, the experience of being tossed out in a smoky corner of a club while on tour left an indelible impression on Ringo. He remained silent. He had done so before, but he no longer held him in high regard. In spite of the fact that the animosity faded with time, Ringo's sentiments never truly improved. Their relationship never progressed beyond being courteous, though he and Charlie would eventually toast each other and say nice things to each other. When the Stones were referred to as peers, Ringo would still scowl behind closed doors. He didn't care about the rankings or the headlines. It was spiritual in nature, and when that essence was questioned, particularly by someone who, because the line had already been drawn, they ought to have known better. Reason being, the following group on his hit parade mocked not only his playing, but also the Beatles. Their haughtiness and volume are excessive. They claimed to be followers, but Ringo could tell they weren't, since they were arrogant, overbearing, and completely confused. The year is 1990, and Ringo is once again a household name. As a solo artist and one of the last true rock stars from Britain's musical heritage, he has achieved superstardom. For Forget about being a drummer anymore. Up next, Oasis. A pair of sneers and an air of self-assurance descended upon the stage as the Gallagher brothers, music that can rock a stadium. The media portrayed them as the Beatles' natural successors. The Four Seasons were worshipped, not merely admired. At least that was the impression I got. However, Ringo was aware of the situation. They didn't love us, he said at the end. The mere idea of us thrilled them. The Gallaghers were deficient in character but made up for it in sound. On record covers and in interviews, they frequently brought up the Beatles. In reality though, it seemed more like the respect was an act. In 1996, Noel Gallagher famously claimed that Oasis had more fans than the Beatles. It was an intentional action, such as the contentious song by John Lennon from a long time ago. John was more snarky and Noel was more egotistical in his speech. The actual feud began behind the scenes at an awards show that same year, but Ringo remained silent in public. As he approached Ringo, the visibly inebriated and obnoxious Liam Gallagher remarked, "You're the lucky one, mate, you have to ride on the backs of John and Paul." No movement from Ringo. He remained silent, just walking away, that infamously difficult to read smile of his. Later on when they were alone, he was more forthright. Absolutely every one of them. His words were, "No soul, just noise." Plagiarism, without intent. Oasis, in Ringo's view, exemplified all that the Beatles were not. Overly confident without genuine emotion, and brash for the sake of brazenness. But the following band would have done even worse if Oasis had kept him waiting. In addition to their terrible treatment of the Beatles, they actively sought to dismantle the very essence of what they stood for. The Sex Pistols create aimless rock music. They were not interested in creating music. Their plot included arson on the Beatles' newly constructed home. They caused pain to Ringo, and he will never get over it. Not every time did Ringo despise punk rock. It was important to him. Its vitality, its untamed nature, and the fact that it defies convention, such as The Clash. He observed that a rebellion with a foundation and a cause for fury. However, that did not apply to the Sex Pistols. According to Ringo, it was never furious. Everything fell into place. At the end of the 1970s, the Beatles were no longer just a band. They were a story. Even the Sex Pistols were aware of it. Their legacy would be immortalized. It wasn't enough for them to merely stand in the shadow of the Titan. A spit on it was in their future. They were described as spoiled hippies by Johnny Rotten. Laughing, Sid Vicious once said that Ringo was really just an armless clock, an assault designed to cast him as nothing more than a timepiece, completely devoid of imagination. In front of others, Ringo chose not to respond. That wasn't him. On the other hand, he was irate behind the scenes. Ringo had the firm belief that the universal language of music, its rhythm, melody and message, could unite anyone and everyone. The Pistols, in his mind, were nothing more than a masked assassin. What drove him absolutely bonkers, though, was when band manager Malcolm McLaren told the press that the band members deliberately agitated Beatles fans in order to generate publicity and sell chaos. An afterthought from Ringo was, "That's not music, just a sh." They remained silent regarding the Pistols and never performed a song by them. He did not perceive them as adversaries. Their company's main product was safety pins. However, Ringo was not made fun of remotely by the following band on his list. They hoped that by making faces that resembled the Beatles, they would receive praise. An elaborate hoax, the Monkees were. In an office they plotted their move and pitched themselves to teenagers as the next Beatles. But to Ringo, they were nothing more than a well-mannered imposter who flipped from honesty to dishonesty. U.S. television executives helped propel the Monkees to superstardom in 1966. A television band that aimed to mimic the charisma, energy and success of the Beatles. At first Ringo found it funny. With its mischievous grin and mop-top style, it was entertaining and full of fun. He held that view. However, word got out. Their sales surpassed those of the Beatles. In America, the Monkees triumphed over the Fab Four. Their reign as pop kings has begun. What was once a joke became a serious contest because of the media's enthusiasm. Suddenly, no one was interested in just watching the Monkees. The reviewers thought these were authentic. That damaged Ringo. However, the unseen events were the most painful. Not only was there copying, but there was also made false claims regarding. In the background, studio bands played songs as the Monkees pretended to be artists. It contradicted all that the Beatles had stood for: endless studio time, intense creative disagreements, and the pursuit of authenticity. The Monkees weren't considered a band by Ringo. Those were just a sales tactic. He finally cracked the joke after all these years. They were just an advertisement masquerading as a band. An oral composition. The damage had already been done when the Monkees began penning their own songs and attempting to pass themselves off as genuine musicians. Their attempt to unite people was an act of respect. To come, Ringo was invited, in order to jam. Not at all, he indicated. Backstage passes were sent. He was unfazed. Reason being, Ringo never believed that music was about imitating others. The key was to tell the truth. Once you crossed that line, there was no turning back. Live performances were an even deeper blow to his sense of reality than the Monkees' deceit. The Beach Boys are a tight-knit group that shares a secret rave. Although the Beatles regarded them as their sole genuine rivals, Ringo's admiration for the group quickly turned into a subtle dislike after he received a single insult. The Beatles held the Beach Boys in high esteem. That wasn't merely a surprise to everyone. The Beatles were inspired to experiment with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by its intricate rhythms and profound emotional content. They had mutual respect, worked well together creatively, and a shared goal of altering the 1960s. Although there is a limit to how far respect can go, in Ringo's opinion, Mike Love went too far. It occurred at a rest stop on a tour in the 60s. It would be insane if the two bands were relaxing in the same hotel before heading to the next city. Love, who has verbal communication issues, was settling in. As soon as Ringo heard the words, "The Beatles," one story has it that Love once said, "Studio tricksters couldn't play live without smoke and mirrors." After a while, Ringo froze. That wasn't merely a dig at him. The deed was sacred. Even after the Fab Four stopped touring, live performances remained sacred. That is the place where the Beatles got their start, gained their knowledge, and ultimately became famous. In addition to being impolite, the response made fun of their heritage. Worse yet, it was sent by someone Ringo had once considered a friend. Love never heard from him. Angry or not, he stayed. In his mind, he jotted it. After all these years, when the Beach Boys fan base went absolutely bonkers for their old songs, no matter how many times Ringo nodded politely, he would never truly understand. Still, he held Brian Wilson in high esteem, and praised his genius for creating music from sand. That was not Mike though. His friend overheard him say, "I loved the music. I didn't love the mouths." After that, Ringo couldn't make sense of the Beach Boys, one for their music, which he had loved before, and another for their egotism, which had ruined it. The following band on Ringo's blacklist didn't insult him cheaply or while they were drunk, but Mike Love's comments may have wounded his pride. It was challenging and might damage his credibility as a drummer. Due to that, Led Zeppelin was the authority whose advice he disregarded. The earth trembled under their weight. However, Ringo did not find it musical. That was power. A fleeting encounter with their renowned drummer transformed a subtle admiration into an enduring animosity. The gods of rock were obnoxious and unapproachable. With each arena they rocked and with each riff that shook the walls, Led Zeppelin helped create an aura around themselves. Critics hailed them as the rightful successors to Jimi Hendrix and the natural progression of British rock. Where does Ringo stand? Ringo was not happy about it. The tune slipped their minds. The one time he mentioned fire, he said it was only fireworks. Their success had left him feeling calm. Not at all. Come and go he had witnessed. The cockiness, the incessant need to show off, play the game, and be the boss were too much for him to handle. Even more glaring was a 1970s evening in a London club that solidified that John Bonham, the vicious machine gun drummer for Zeppelin, came over to Ringo while he was sipping a drink in the corner. They spoke for a brief moment. "How about a drum-off?" he inquired, his tone slightly playful before leaning in. With a gracious nod, Ringo smiled. He didn't like it. He failed to go out and have fun. However, he refused to let it go. We hear he chuckled and remarked, "Didn't think so, Beatles triangle player." Despite the sincere smile on the speaker's face, the line's impact was profound. Ringo remained silent. He remained composed. All he did was stand there, sip his drink, and then he walked away. They stopped communicating with one another. That was it for Zeppelin, according to Ringo. They were a band too preoccupied with being number one for their music to be heard over all the background noise. Bonham pounded away where Ringo played softly. Furthermore, as the Globe lauded the rumble, but Ringo remained motionless. "They hit hard," said he, "but they didn't move me." That's when the most iconic drummer of all time realized something. Bands with more volume don't necessarily mean more. Ringo, why must he speak at this moment? So what gives? In light of everything that has transpired, why bring up the subject now? At 84 years old, Ringo Starr is no longer the carefree Beatle who plays the drums with joy. He is among the few survivors who can recall a moment when history was altered. Additionally, he is likely tired of pretending that everything is fine. It wasn't just that he didn't like the music of these six bands. All of his musical beliefs were challenged by them. Unknown to most was the extent to which those whose lives were marked by harmony, cooperation, and moderation suffered. His intention is not to cause a stir by naming names. To set the record straight, he's doing it. Every detail can be recalled by even the most reserved individual in the room, as the rhythm continues. If you would like to see more stories with real people in them, please like and share this one. Sign up right away.